Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the fog of human memory, where your tired mind might not have suspected a story could even exist, the tale of the spoon. Imagine the steam of a primordial stew swirling around your nose, so thick and earthy, you almost choke on it. Picture mud-caked hands desperate for a taste, trying to cradle hot broth in trembling palms. You are there thousands of years ago, where the first spoons were nothing but a cupped palm of clay, a curved shell, a scrap of hollowed-out animal bone. It was crude, yes, but in that moment it was the only barrier between burning your fingers and feeding your belly. You probably won't survive this, you think, with a sleepy chuckle, if you had to eat that hot sludge straight from the pot. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm always curious how far and wide our sleepy travels reach. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through a dusty clearing, squatting beside an ancient cooking pit, where a leathery hide tent flaps in a smoky breeze. A woman stirs something thick in a clay-lined pit, dipping what looks like a child's paddle into the bubbling mess. It is one of the first spoons humanity ever saw form from hardened river clay pinched crudely into a scoop shape. There is no polished silver here, no delicate handles, only the raw necessity of a curved scoop to keep hot soup from scalding your bare hands. Some early spoons were made from seashells, cracked open by waves and polished by sand, ready to slip between lips and teeth. Others came from animal bones, hollowed into gentle scoops that felt surprisingly familiar against the tongue. In these first spoons, you sense the trembling hope of a species trying to survive one warm sip at a time. Historians still argue whether these humble mud and bone ladles emerged in one place or many. Was it the river dwellers of Mesopotamia who first pinched a mud spoon, or the forest hunters of Central Europe? The trail is as murky as the soup itself. But we know these scoops carried more than broth. They carried the comfort of a full belly, a mother's lullaby against starvation, and the soft clatter of home. If you could hold one of those first spoons, you'd find it shockingly heavy, with a handle worn to a nub from thousands of calloused hands. There'd be bits of char still stuck to the bowl of it, or a hairline crack from being left too close to the fire. Imagine setting that spoon down next to your modern metal cutlery. It would look almost prehistoric, like a cousin of a stone spear, and yet you'd recognize it instantly. Because a spoon is a promise that you'll be fed, that there's something worth sipping, that you might see another sunrise. By the fireside, you hear the faint slap of children's feet in the mud, their wide eyes waiting for a turn at the communal stew. There's no etiquette here, no please pass the spoon with dainty manners. If you get a chance to dip, you take it. Maybe you even wipe it off on your sleeve and pass it along. Nobody cares about germs, not in this place, not with starvation lurking behind every bush. One fringe discovery in archaeology suggests that certain early spoons were marked with little dots or lines, possibly a primitive family mark or accounting system. Did these markings help one group ration their stew fairly, or were they charms to protect against sickness? Historians still debate whether these scratchings were practical or spiritual, but they linger as a tiny voice from people who had no other way to leave their story behind. A few meters away, you spot a more refined scoop, carved from an animal shoulder blade, stronger than clay, easier to shape with a sharp flint. Some early cooking spoons were even made from a long, split stick tied at one end, bending into a rough, oval shape. Ingenious, even if they'd fall apart after a few months. These fragile first spoons may seem silly compared to your dishwasher's safe stainless steel, but look closer and you'll see their brilliance. They let a weary traveler sip scalding broth without blisters. They let a sick child taste herbs in warm water. They let a family feed everyone from a single pot, one scoop at a time. And so you stand there a visitor from the future, holding the echo of your own dinner spoon in your hand, a simple, cupped shape that's traveled through millennia. Think about it. You with your shiny steel utensil share a silent bond with a cave-dwelling ancestor scraping marrow from bone. Next time you slurp soup, remember that first mud scoop pinched together by shaking hands, desperate to stay alive. Maybe give a tiny nod of thanks, even if the odds of food poisoning back then were sky high. Sleepy, yet don't worry. The tale of the spoon is only just beginning, and you've barely touched the surface of its surprising, sometimes hilarious, sometimes haunting evolution. There are royal spoons and plague spoons, and even spoons so beautiful they could get you robbed on the road. But we'll ease into those slowly. For now, let your eyelids droop as you sit beside that smoky fire, steam curling around your nose, watching a bone spoon travel from hand to hand, each person cradling the same hope to taste a little warmth before night falls again. You ease forward through the drifting haze, leaving behind those muddy scoops and bone ladles, and suddenly you're under a burning sun in a kingdom of towering pyramids. Pharaoh's Egypt glimmers like a mirage gold everywhere, as if the gods themselves dined at these tables. You slip through a sandstone doorway and spot a feast laid out on polished limestone, the scent of roasted goose and honeyed beer filling the heavy air. And there, laid carefully by a platter of stewed lentils, gleams an Egyptian spoon unlike anything you've seen before. It is shaped like a lotus blossom, engraved with tiny hieroglyphs, its golden bowl polished to a mirror shine. You can practically see your own wide-eyed reflection in it, even if the artisans who made it never imagined your face. Historians still argue whether these ceremonial spoons were truly used for eating, or were they reserved for temple offerings, a way to feed the gods themselves. Either way, they are real, and they tell a human story etched into gold. One small fact slips into your mind: the oldest surviving Egyptian spoons date to around 1500 BCE, long after the earliest clay scoops. These were luxury objects, sometimes cast in bronze or even ivory, made for people who would never risk eating from a cracked mud bowl again. A pharaoh could command any metalworker to pour the kingdom's wealth into one perfect spoon, a tool that turned a simple meal into a kind of royal ritual. You shift closer and see a servant kneeling by a basin, rinsing a line of spoons carved from ebony, each one inlaid with silver or mother of pearl. These spoons are weighty in the hand, finely balanced, showing off their maker's skill. And maybe if you squint, you'll spot a spoon decorated with an image of Hathor, goddess of love and joy, a subtle wish for sweetness in every bite. No fast food convenience here, no plastic cutlery getting tossed in a bin. Every spoon in this hall is a treasure carried with pride and guarded as fiercely as a ring of solid gold. One fringe Egyptology theory even suggests spoons doubled as tiny personal charms. If you were wealthy enough, your spoon was yours alone, never to be touched by another, a symbol of status that no one could steal without risking death. You slip through the shadows, stepping carefully around dancers with clinking ankle bells, and pause to watch a priest lifting a beautifully painted spoon in a temple ritual. Honey wine, ground herbs, offerings to a god's open mouth. The same curved bowl, the same trusting gesture, but aimed at eternity rather than a hungry child. It makes you shiver a little. The spoon, you realize, has always had a bit of magic, a promise of nourishment, or a prayer for mercy. A heavy gust of desert wind rattles the palace shutters, sending a tiny drift of sand across your bare feet. In one corner, a dignitary fingers a spoon with a falcon's head at the handle, as if Horus himself might swoop down and approve of his table manners. These spoons were not only useful, they were status-laden, a language in metal. In ancient Egypt, a decorated spoon could say, "I am powerful, I am blessed, I will not go hungry." Remember that first clay scoop back by the smoky fireside, that desperate mud bowl from Section 1. Imagine carrying it into this place. People would laugh or stare in horror as if you'd brought a rotting fish into a perfume shop. Because in this hall, spoons had been elevated to art, to ritual, to a point where their very existence made a political statement. Historians still debate whether pharaohs traveled with their own personal spoons on long journeys, or if each royal kitchen stocked dozens just in case. It's a small mystery that reminds you how even the simplest tool can vanish behind layers of pomp and secrecy. You breathe deeply, letting the scent of coriander and cumin fill your lungs, and wander past scribes who tally the kitchen stores. If you looked over their shoulders, you'd see lists of dates, onions, wheat, and spoons. Always spoons carefully counted, as if they were precious coins. Then, in a quiet courtyard, you see a group of children crouched over a clay bowl, fighting to share one small brass spoon. Its handle is bent, the engraving half worn away, but it still works. In their eyes glimmers the same primal hope as those children from the first smoky camp. One bite of warm food, one moment of safety, one night without hunger. That spark never goes away. A guard calls out that the feast is ending, and trays of spoons are gathered with the same reverence you might use to collect jewelry. You cannot help but grin. Imagine explaining to your modern self that a spoon could be so prized that its loss might bring shame to an entire household. Your mind begins to drift as a fresh breeze stirs the linen curtains, carrying a note of cool Nile water, sweet and earthy. In the faint lamplight, the polished spoons almost seem to glow, promising another tomorrow, another meal. And perhaps you wonder, was it really so different from your own kitchen drawer, where a favorite spoon waits shaped perfectly to your hand? Before you leave this place of golden mouthpieces and divine offerings, let the idea settle in your heart. A spoon is far more than a tool. It is an artifact of trust, a way to feed a body, to soothe a soul, to tell the world who you are. Feel the stone floor beneath your knees warm from the day's sun, as a servant rinses the final spoon in a basin, careful not to chip its delicate rim. Then a hush falls, soft and absolute, the kind of silence only night can bring in the desert. Let that calm settle around you and rest easy, knowing the journey is just beginning. You step away from the shimmering Nile palaces, following time's slow river, forward into the salty breezes of the Aegean and the dusty markets of Rome. Here you find a curious sight that feels both familiar and completely alien: diners holding short rounded sticks in one hand and in the other a sort of shallow spoon, a half spoon, half scoop. The ancients of Greece and Rome seemed torn between their love for slicing bread with knives, spearing bits with sticks, and spooning up broth. Their hybrid table gear feels almost experimental, as if no one had settled yet on how to tame their tangled rustic meals. You brush past a Roman matron, fussing with a servant as she clutches a broad, bold bronze spoon. It looks sturdy enough to dig a trench with, but elegant too in its balanced curve. Then you spy a child using a stick to pin down a floating chickpea, then flicking it onto the spoon to shovel into his mouth. There is a certain clumsy genius to the method, one that makes you smile in spite of yourself. Historians still argue whether these spoons with accompanying sticks were inspired by trade with the East or were a purely Mediterranean improvisation. Either way, they were everywhere. A mainstream fact floats by like a leaf on warm olive oil. The Romans called their spoons cochlearia, a word drawn from the spiral shape of a snail's shell. Snails were delicacies then, and the spoon's shape to scoop them soon became a staple for everything from honey to thin soups. The tiny cochlearia, found in digs around Pompeii, were often no larger than a modern espresso spoon, yet they were so valued they ended up buried with their owners. In a busy courtyard, you watch a merchant sorting his spoons by size and purpose, long-handled ones for ladling, smaller ones for sauces, and the flat sticks for fish sauces, so strong they might knock you out cold. One fringe theory suggests these eating sticks could double as grooming tools, cleaning the ears or picking teeth between courses. Delicious and disgusting, you might mutter, but Roman practicality knew no limits. It all feels so earthy, so human, and you catch yourself chuckling at the half-eaten, garum-splattered spoons reeking of fermented fish guts. Just imagine the next dinner guest politely asking for one. You'd gag, but they'd slurp it up like ambrosia. As you lean on a cracked marble pillar, you see a dignitary raise a spoon decorated with tiny dolphins, the handle delicately twisted almost like a work of jewelry. No mud scoop here. This was wealth on display, Roman style, in the heart of empire. Food was a weapon of social ranking, and a spoon could be a quiet dagger aimed at your rivals. If you showed off the finest spoons, you showed off your place in the pecking order. You walk through a back alley where a battered copper spoon lies in the gutter, stepped on by countless sandals. Even in decay, it reminds you how necessary these tools were. They fed soldiers, sailors, and peasants alike, a universal comfort across a vast empire. A spoon was as intimate as a voice at your ear, a personal companion on a journey. One old scholar, scribbling by lamplight, once wondered aloud whether the spoon became a symbol of Roman practicality itself, always ready, never wasteful, strong enough to serve, and gentle enough to share. It's a line worth remembering as you watch two soldiers break bread in a camp, each balancing a greasy spoon on their knees while telling dirty jokes under the stars. Another debate among historians still echoes through marble lecture halls. Were these hybrid spoon and stick sets inspired by contact with Eastern chopsticks, or did they arise completely on their own? The Mediterranean was a crossroads, and spoons were carried as far as distant Persia, and beyond, passed along trade routes like a secret handshake of civilization. You peer inside a cramped cookshop where a pot of lentils bubbles over a smoky fire, and the cook hurriedly stirs with a bent bronze spoon that's been repaired so many times it looks more patch than utensil. Yet it still serves, carrying warmth from pot to mouth, carrying comfort to a tired body. Let the scene settle, the tang of vinegar and herbs in the air, the clatter of amphorae, the jingle of a coin purse. You standing there with your modern fork at home would seem impossibly strange to these diners. A fork. They might mistake it for a cruel dentist's tool. So for now you fit right in, a dreamer among Greeks and Romans, swirling broth with a spoon while balancing a short stick in your other hand. The conversation buzzes around you, trade, taxes, philosophy, all carried on spoons of metal, wood, and bone. The sun slides behind a cracked tile roof, softening the light, and you feel your eyelids droop. The stories these spoons could tell, if only they could talk, would fill 100 nights. But you only have this one, and you intend to savor it. Let the gentle scrape of bronze on pottery rock you toward drowsiness, just as it once soothed Roman children in smoky kitchens. And remember that your modern stainless steel rests on the shoulders of these ancient hybrids, a strange, beautiful marriage of stick and scoop, feeding bodies and souls from coast to coast. You slip gently forward in time, leaving behind the bright mosaics and garum-stained spoons of the Roman world, and drift into the gloomier, smokier kitchens of medieval Europe. The air here feels close thick with the tang of boiled cabbage and wood smoke, and the spoons, well, they're not exactly golden treasures anymore. Instead, they are heavy, pewter dull, and a little sad-looking, yet they rest in every bowl and on every rough-hewn table. One woman ladles out a thin barley stew, the spoon in her hand, a lopsided pewter oval with a stubby handle, its edges worn from years of scraping cauldrons. You watch her pass it to a child, who barely pauses before shoving it between his chapped lips. There's a softness in that gesture, the same hope, the same trust that those ancient Egyptians once held in their gilded spoons. But in this world, the danger is not just starvation, but the spoon itself. Because here's a mainstream medieval truth. Pewter in the Middle Ages often contained high levels of lead, which could leach into hot food. Historians still argue whether medieval lead poisoning came more from water pipes or tableware, but the humble spoon certainly carried its share of silent risk. That barley stew might warm you on a freezing night, but the spoon might be plotting a slower, darker harm. A boy coughs in the corner, thin and pale, and you wonder, maybe uncomfortably, whether the spoon is partly to blame. Yet no one here seems to care or even know. A spoon was still a treasure, hard to come by, something you'd guard as jealously as a family ring. In the corner of the hall, a blacksmith hammers out another batch of pewter spoons, pouring molten metal into a rough sand mold. The hiss of cooling metal sounds like a quiet lullaby if you're tired enough. Sometimes you almost think the spoons themselves are singing, promising survival, even with poison in their veins. One fringe record mentions that medieval households often passed down spoons across generations, engraving them with initials or simple marks. These weren't just utensils, but family relics. You can almost picture a grandmother's hands clutching the same leaden spoon she used as a child, a quiet heirloom of barley soup and hard winters. In a drafty castle, you catch a glimpse of a noble's table, where the spoons are a little fancier, polished pewter with twisted handles or even tipped with a small silver plate to show off status. It's all for show, really. Because when you taste the same bland broth, it still tastes like boiled sadness. Remember those delicate Egyptian lotus spoons? They'd seem alien here, too fine and too gentle for this world of heavy stews and rough bread crusts. Medieval Europe needed sturdiness, something that could survive being dropped, boiled, banged against iron pots. Pewter, for all its poison, was cheap and easy won out. A cook stirs a pot of leeks and onions with a spoon, so battered its edge is worn nearly flat. Yet she handles it like a priceless gem, tapping it on the rim of the cauldron, with a little flourish, as if she's performing a ritual. Because in a way, she is. That spoon is the guardian of her family's hunger. Historians still debate whether the widespread use of pewter contributed to Europe's sometimes short lifespans, or if other poisons like rancid grain were far worse. The mystery sticks to your thoughts like a smear of lard on a bowl. You feel a chill, as if the spoon itself were warning you to eat carefully, to stay alert, to notice the difference between feeding yourself and slowly harming yourself. You drift toward the hearth, where a boy carves a chunk of bread to mop up the thin stew. He clutches the spoon tight, as if afraid someone might steal it. Which they might, spoons were valuable, and losing one could mean days without a proper meal. Then your eyes land on a stranger object, a tiny spice spoon hung from the neck of a merchant's wife. Just a little scoop, maybe no bigger than a thumbnail made of brass instead of pewter. She uses it to measure precious saffron into her dinner, carefully scraping every golden strand. It is a glimpse of what's to come, a spark of luxury, even in a world that seemed hopelessly gray. Let yourself feel the crackle of the fire, the smell of smoke in your hair, the taste of turnip broth on your lips. It's a harsh life, but a spoon is still hope, a promise that something warm, however plain, can be yours. You settle in the corner of the hall, head resting on your arms as the clatter of pewter spoons echoes like tiny bells ringing through the night. Even lead can lull you to sleep if you're tired enough. And you are, aren't you? Let the gentle weight of history press your eyelids down as the medieval world sighs and turns toward dawn. You linger in the smoky shadows of medieval Europe, your dreams snagging on that tiny brass spice spoon worn around the merchant's wife's neck. It pulls you forward through a narrow doorway lined with fragrant bundles of cinnamon pepper and nutmeg. Here you step into the hushed world of spice merchants, whose treasures were guarded more fiercely than gold weighed carefully on scales so delicate they could tip from a single saffron thread. The spoons in this place are different. Smaller, more ornate, each one a miniature sculpture. You watch a merchant measure a pinch of cloves with a spoon that looks as fragile as a bird's bone. Carved from ivory, its handle is etched with twisting vines and tiny animals. This spoon is not for everyday porridge. It is a coded tool part of a secret language among spice traders. One mainstream fact, medieval spice spoons were often marked with strange notches or stamped symbols, a kind of shorthand for weight or purity. A tiny bird mark might mean one pinch a star could stand for double, letting merchants price spices without writing a word. Historians still argue whether these coded markings were purely practical, or whether they also carried hints of superstition, warding off thieves with symbols that looked like curses. A young apprentice wipes the ivory spoon on a scrap of linen and hangs it back on a hook where it waits suspended like a sacred relic. You feel its power, how it holds in its little bowl the difference between a bland winter meal and a dish worthy of a king. In this era, a spoon was not just a delivery tool, but a guardian of flavor rationing, precious dusts of the earth. You slip through another doorway into a kitchen where a pot of mulled wine simmers over an iron grate. A woman adds nutmeg with a spoon shaped like a seashell, passing it back to her daughter, who handles it with the same reverence as a holy icon. A fringe discovery suggests that spice spoons were sometimes blessed by local priests before market days as a way to protect both the seller and the buyer from fraud or spoilage. You grin, even the spoon needed a little divine backup in this tough world. In the flickering torchlight, you catch a glimpse of one merchant's personal collection, a dozen tiny spoons, each one marked with dots and stars bundled together on a leather thong. They rattle softly like wind chimes as he moves a lullaby of wealth and fear. These spoons, you sense, could feed an entire village or buy a noble's loyalty if filled with enough pepper. The air is sweet with honey and dried orange peel, and your eyelids grow heavier, blinking against the torch smoke. You lean against a post, watching as customers haggle over a few pinches of saffron, and you think how much trust rests on the shape of a spoon. If it measured too much, fortunes could vanish; too little, and reputations might collapse. One matron argues with the spice merchant, her fingers stabbing toward a brass spoon with a broken handle. "Too small," she says, voice sharp as vinegar. He shrugs, measuring again the little scoop, working its quiet magic, keeping peace in a room full of hungry tempers. A breeze stirs through the spice shop, rattling bunches of dried herbs overhead. You close your eyes for a moment, breathing in the warm, peppery scent. Maybe you think these spice spoons carried more than just flavor. They carried hope, excitement, a dream of something better than the stale bread and boiled cabbage that usually filled medieval bellies. Historians still debate whether the coded spoon marks were standardized across trade guilds or if each family invented their own private marks. There is no clear answer, no neat explanation, just another riddle etched into metal and bone. You can almost feel the mystery clinging to your fingertips like a trace of saffron that will not wash away. Then a little girl comes running through the doorway, giggling her fist, clutching a spoon no bigger than a fingernail. She pretends to measure imaginary spices into an empty bowl, copying her mother's movements. It is a simple game, but it tells you something deep and gentle. Even a child understands the power of a spoon, how it transforms a handful of nothing into a feast for the imagination. Let your mind drift on the warm waves of spice-scented air, hearing the faint hum of market chatter beyond the doorway. The tiny spoons, the coated marks, the slow swirl of nutmeg into wine, they wrap you in a cocoon of sleepy comfort, a reminder that even the smallest spoon can carry centuries of stories. Stay here a while, leaning in the doorway, half in shadow, half in torchlight. Let the quiet clink of spice spoons soothe you, each one a tiny promise that even in a hard, hungry world, something warm and fragrant might be waiting just beyond the next meal. You drift onward, slipping past the spice-stained air of medieval markets, and find yourself stepping through a tall stone archway into the Renaissance. The world here feels brighter, more confident, its halls echoing with music and chatter and the sharp gleam of ambition. Everything seems to sparkle, silks, gold threads, polished marble, and yes, even spoons. You glance across a banquet table, so crowded with dishes it might buckle, and see spoons of every kind and size, each one glinting with pride. These are not humble mud scoops or battered pewter paddles anymore. They are engraved masterpieces, a silversmith's dream, a collector's brag. Because in the Renaissance, spoons were more than tools, they were status trophies as carefully curated as a noble's family crest. One mainstream fact, wealthy families in 16th century Europe commissioned sets of silver spoons etched with coats of arms or elaborate scrollwork proudly displayed at feasts. Some guests even traveled with their own personal spoons, often in little embroidered pouches, tied at the belt to avoid sharing with strangers. Historians still argue whether this custom came from fears of poisoning or simply the thrill of showing off your own initials etched into gleaming silver. You lean closer to a gentleman bragging about his newest spoon. The handle is twisted like a barley stalk, ending in a tiny lion's head. His neighbor rolls her eyes. She has a spoon shaped like a dolphin. Thank you very much. And so the conversation goes one-upping each other's spoons with all the flair of a modern car commercial. A fringe find from an old merchant's record suggests some Renaissance spoons were designed with a little hook halfway down the handle, letting you hang it on your belt between courses, a kind of wearable cutlery jewelry. It makes you smile, picturing a fussy noble patting their spoon the way you'd pat your phone, just to be sure it was still there. Over by the hearth, you see a servant polishing a tray of spoons so dazzling you nearly squint. These spoons are not just decoration, they're certificates of belonging. Owning a fine spoon in a time when many still ate with their hands meant you were part of a higher circle. You'd made it, a small shine of triumph. The music picks up a lute, singing somewhere among the hall's carved beams, and dancers swirl past trailing silken ribbons. Between every plate, changed spoons are switched out, each dish deserving its own shape and size. The roasted pheasant gets a deep, rounded spoon. The candied almonds, a tiny silver scoop no bigger than a thumbnail. There is a spoon for everything, a delicate choreography you might struggle to keep straight, but they know it by heart. You lean against a pillar and let the chatter swirl around you, hearing how spoons even became gifts at weddings and baptisms. A godparent might give a baby an engraved silver spoon, a promise that the child would never go hungry. Some called it a birth spoon, a blessing folded into the baby's first days. One thoughtful aside, historians still puzzle over a few spoon-shaped tokens found in graves, wondering if these were meant to feed a soul in the afterlife, or simply to remind the departed of a lifetime of comfort. There is no answer. But the thought lingers warm and soft like a lullaby of kindness. Across the room, you spot a young scribe picking at a crust of bread with a battered wooden spoon, probably the only one he could afford. Its handle is scorched from an accidental brush with the hearth, but it serves him well enough. Even here, in the swirl of riches, you find the familiar bond of spoon and stomach, a humble promise of something warm at the end of a long day. Your eye drifts back to the noble table, where laughter rattles off the marble walls. The spoons shine in the candlelight so bright, they almost seem alive. You wonder how many hungry eyes once watched those same spoons with envy. How many dreams, how many gentle hopes were folded into a single engraved swirl of silver. The music softens and the dancers slow, breathing hard, cheeks flushed from spinning. A breeze catches the edge of a tablecloth, fluttering the spoons in their neat rows like tiny silver soldiers ready for a new battle. You close your eyes, letting the memory of these shining trophies rest in your mind. Or a Renaissance spoon, after all, was more than a utensil. It was a declaration, a badge of belonging, a tiny scrap of artistry that said, "I have enough, and I want you to know it." Let yourself sink into that thought, breathing in the faint smell of roasted herbs, candle wax, and freshly scrubbed oak floors. The spoon has come a long way from mud and bone, and so have you, following its quiet, determined journey. Rest your head for a moment and let the hush of the grand hall wash over you, a lullaby of silver and laughter. You let the hush of Renaissance splendor fade, blinking away candlelight and velvet curtains, and drift across the seas with the great waves of colonists and traders. The air shifts sharper, rougher, scented with pine smoke and wet clay. You land in a settlement on the edge of a wild continent, where the dreams of Europe collide with harsh new realities. Here, spoons once more become humble whittled and fiercely practical. The clatter of a wooden ladle echoes in a rough log cabin, stirring a pot of beans that bubbles over a smoky hearth. A settler carves a spoon straight from a scrap of local maple, shaping it with a worn iron knife. There's no time for silver etching, no place for noble lions on the handle. This spoon is raw, rugged, and born of desperate necessity. One mainstream fact: colonial settlers often made spoons from wood because it was easy to carve, cheap to replace, and wouldn't burn lips like a metal spoon might when dipped in hot stew. Wood was forgiving, flexible, and abundant, the perfect material for a world still taking its first rough steps. A small child tugs at your sleeve, showing off her own tiny spoon carved from cherry wood, its bowl, a little crooked, but perfect for scooping precious sugar when the barrel allowed. You smile, sensing the pride in that crooked handle, a piece of her family's survival stitched into its every groove. Historians still argue whether colonial spoon design was more influenced by English patterns or by Native American craft traditions, since many settlers learned directly from local tribes how to shape wood for cooking. The styles overlap, a quiet testament to exchange as well as conquest. By the fire, an old man whittles a spoon for his grandson, smoothing the handle with slow, careful strokes. A fringe tidbit slips into your mind. Some colonists believed a spoon passed down from grandfather to grandchild would carry good luck protecting the family from starvation and bad harvests. A superstition maybe, but one wrapped in hope. You drift through the rough cabin, tracing the shine of animal fat, still clinging to the well-used spoons, hearing the clink of mismatched pewter mixed with hand-carved wood. It's a far cry from the dazzling Renaissance silver, but no less meaningful. Here, every spoon is a lifeline. Beyond the settlement, you glimpse a traveling trader rattling a pouch of cheap tin spoons, trying to sell them to a woman who eyes the thin metal suspiciously. Tin was cheaper than silver, but fragile, prone to bending and denting. Still, a metal spoon was a mark of progress, a sign you'd arrived in a new world, determined to build civilization from scratch. You step outside the cabin into the cold night air and look up at a sky so wide it seems to swallow you whole. A woman kneels near a stew pot, testing the broth with a spoon carved from dogwood, and you watch her pause, blowing on the spoonful, then tasting with a cautious hope that you know all too well by now. That tiny scoop of flavor, that moment of comfort, belongs to every human who ever lived. A wagon creaks past loaded with tools and barrels of salted pork, and in a side basket, a few battered wooden spoons rattle together. It feels like the simplest lullaby, that rattling sound reminding you that even on the far edge of the world, a spoon could carry warmth, keep families close, and hold a promise of tomorrow. Historians still debate how many spoons came over on the earliest ships, how many were made on the spot, and how many were bartered from local hands. The records are patchy, smudged, and incomplete, but you can sense the truth in every warped, singed bowl and worn-down handle. These spoons were survivors just like the people who held them. A whiff of salt air drifts in, mingling with wood smoke as you close your eyes. You can almost feel the rough wood grain against your lips, the soft give of a spoon carved by a father's worried hands. There is no silver polish here, no noble's crest, only the quiet faith that tomorrow will bring another meal, another chance to sit by the fire and share a steaming bowl. Let yourself sink into that warmth, into the flicker of a frontier hearth, as the world beyond howls with storms and darkness. Listen to the steady scrape of spoons in pots, a chorus of survival ringing through the cold night. That sound, dear traveler, is history itself echoing across centuries, reminding you that whether in a palace or a log cabin, the humble spoon has always been your companion, always a steady promise that no one should face hunger alone. You leave behind the smoky cabins and rough-hewn spoons of the colonies and drift onward through the centuries, feeling the world change beneath your feet. Sugar, that sweet, glittering treasure, is calling its grip strong and bitter all at once. You find yourself in a grand plantation house, warm breezes rustling sugarcane fields beyond the wide verandas, while inside the kitchen the air is thick with the sharp, sticky scent of syrup and molasses. Here a new kind of spoon emerges, born from the empire's hunger for sweetness, the sugar spoon. Smaller than a soup spoon, rounder than a teaspoon, with a deep bowl to cradle precious crystals. You watch a servant scoop sugar from a ceramic jar, moving carefully as if handling diamonds. And in that moment, you sense the contradictions of this place, luxury balanced on human suffering, sweetness hiding a brutal truth. A mainstream fact for your tired mind by the 18th century sugar had become so vital to European tastes that entire spoon shapes were dedicated to serving it, from scalloped sugar shells to shell-bowled sugar tongs. These tools were symbols of wealth, but also symbols of power bought at a cost measured in human lives. You hover near the pantry where a row of sugar spoons is laid out like soldiers. Their handles are etched with flowers, their bowls rounded to perfection, and each one seems to say, "We control sweetness." It's a quiet, terrible statement. Historians still argue whether these sugar spoon designs were copied from Indian patterns or developed purely in Europe's drawing rooms. That mystery lingers like a grain of sugar refusing to dissolve. In the far corner, a woman shows her daughter how to gently scrape sugar from a hard cone with a silver spoon, tapping the lumps into fine powder. There's a hush in the air, a kind of respect, because sugar was precious, hoarded, almost worshipped. A fringe tidbit you might find curious: some families kept their sugar spoons locked away with the tea chests and spices, a key dangling from the lady of the house's belt. You couldn't risk a servant or child helping themselves to so much as a teaspoon. Beyond the house, you glimpse enslaved workers in the cane fields, their voices low, cutting stalk after stalk under a punishing sun. You feel a hard stone in your heart because the spoon inside the fancy drawing room cannot exist without their brutal labor. That's the terrible knot at the center of these sugar spoons, sweet in the mouth, bitter in the soul. You follow a sugar-laden tray into the parlor, where delicate porcelain cups wait for tea. A lady of the house taps 2 lumps of sugar into her cup, stirring with a spoon shaped like a tiny conch shell, oblivious to the fields beyond her window. That spoon for her is nothing more than a polite bit of ceremony, a sparkling accent. For you, it's a quiet scream, a reminder of empire's cost. Historians still puzzle over why sugar spoons, of all utensils, became so ornate so quickly. Some theories suggest it was to show off the host's taste. Others say it was to make sugar appear even more precious, a kind of edible jewelry. You might lean in close, studying those little engraved blossoms on the spoon's handle, and wonder how a simple scoop could carry so much human contradiction. A breeze drifts through the high windows, catching the faint smell of tea, of lemon peel, of sugar syrup, simmering on the stove. You notice a small boy in the corner, licking a trace of sugar off a battered pewter spoon, his eyes shining with a joy so pure it almost makes you weep. The spoon in his hand, bent and plain, holds the same sweetness as the silver one in the parlor. That is a truth no empire can fully own. You slip out to the porch, listening to the distant hum of voices in the cane rows, and close your eyes for a moment. The sugar spoon, delicate, carefully guarded, proudly displayed, is a symbol of human desire, of comfort, of greed, of cruelty, all woven together. Let that idea settle into your chest as the evening light grows softer, sliding across polished mahogany floors. The spoon has traveled far from mud to bone to gold, and now to the glittering, heartbreaking service of sugar. Rest for a moment in that quiet parlor, hearing the gentle clink of spoons against porcelain as dusk creeps over the cane fields. There is sweetness here, yes, but shadows too, and your heart might feel a little heavier for it. Let the breeze cool your cheek and hold on to the small truth that a spoon, for all its simple shape, can carry the weight of empires. You let the echoes of sugar and empire fade and gently step onward into a world even more delicate, more refined, a world obsessed with tiny rituals and perfect manners. You find yourself in a drawing room in 18th century England, where the hush is so carefully measured, you might be afraid to even breathe. Here, tea is everything, and the teaspoon reigns supreme. Imagine the soft clink of a porcelain teacup, the floral steam curling through the air as a lady of the house lifts a teaspoon, no bigger than her thumb. It is made of fine silver, its handle, twisted elegantly, ending in a tiny seashell shape, polished to a mirror gleam. That little scoop, so light you might forget it's even there, holds more power than any sword in this moment, the power of polite society. One mainstream fact: by the mid-1700s, the teaspoon became an absolutely essential part of the tea ritual across Europe, precisely sized for one measure of tea leaves or sugar. Its shape was standardized so tightly that silversmiths practically built their businesses around it. And that one small utensil changed how the world drank tea. You shift closer to watch a guest measure out a spoonful of sugar with painstaking precision, then stir it in delicate circles, barely rippling the surface of her tea. Historians still argue whether these teaspoons evolved from earlier spice spoons or emerged purely to match Europe's exploding tea obsession. But wherever they came from, they became a quiet weapon of etiquette. The tea table is a battleground. One wrong swirl, one sloppy drip, and you risk gossip that might haunt you for years. There is a light, sly joke in that, and you smirk as you notice how the lady of the house eyes every teaspoon like a hawk, making sure no guest uses the wrong one. A fringe tidbit peeks into your mind. Some of these teaspoons were engraved not just with initials, but with hidden love codes meant to pass secret messages between young couples. Imagine a shy girl blushing as her sweetheart slips her a spoon, marked with a tiny heart near the bowl. A tiny rebellion hidden in plain sight. You move around the table, taking in the ritual, the choreography of elbows, saucers, teaspoons, tapping against cups. It feels as rigid and complicated as any military drill, but softer, gentler, scented with bergamot and honey. In the corner, a child stirs milk into his tea with a clunky pewter teaspoon, a cheaper cousin to the lady's fine silver. Even here, status peeks through measured one careful spoonful at a time. Yet the child is as proud as any countess, lifting his tea with perfect practiced grace. You glance down at a small tray, where spare teaspoons rest lined up like soldiers waiting for command. Some have scalloped bowls, others smooth, but all share the same gentle promise you will never take. Too much, never spill, never break the sacred calm of tea time. Historians still debate if the teaspoon's rise was truly about tea alone, or whether it served to reinforce a broader culture of measured, controlled, graceful living. Maybe a little of both, you think, as you watch a young man fight to keep his trembling hands steady while stirring his cup. Beyond the drawn curtains, the sound of distant carriage wheels reminds you how connected this ritual was to global trade, to ships crossing oceans, with crates of tea to colonize lands where leaves were plucked under brutal conditions, all of it distilled into this one tiny spoon. Let yourself rest in this quiet parlor, where the ticking of the clock seems to match the measured clink of teaspoons. There is something soothing about the repetition, something hypnotic, almost like a lullaby. The lady of the house leans forward, offering a fresh teaspoon to a friend who just arrived, and the moment feels strangely intimate. A welcome, a gesture of trust, a simple comfort. You realize that the teaspoon, for all its delicate beauty, is a kind of bridge between people, a way to share sweetness and warmth. Your eyes grow heavy as you listen to the gentle swirl of tea and porcelain, the hushed laughter, the faint strain of a violin in another room. The teaspoon has woven itself into this place so tightly, it seems part of the people themselves, an extension of their culture, their pride, their fears. Breathe in the scent of strong black tea, the tang of lemon, the comforting softness of fresh cream. Let the quiet music of teaspoons lull you deeper, reminding you that even the smallest scoop can carry centuries of dreams, worries, and human connection. Settle in for just a while longer, and let the tiny silver spoon rest in your mind, a shining symbol of how we measure not just sugar or tea, but our place in the world, one gentle swirl at a time. You leave behind the quiet swirl of teaspoons and rose-patterned teacups, letting the fragrance of Earl Grey slip from your senses as you drift onward deeper into the prim, rule-bound world of the Victorian era. Here the spoon reaches a height of social power so curious it might make you laugh through your sleepy haze. Because in these crowded parlors and starched dining rooms, spoons became not only tools of taste, but fierce weapons of etiquette. Imagine the hush of a Victorian supper, the clock ticking somewhere in the dim-lit hallway as you sit rigid-backed at a long table gleaming with polished silver. Every bowl of soup, every scoop of pudding demands its own correct spoon. Heaven help you if you choose the wrong one. A single slip, a single stir in the wrong direction might brand you an uncivilized brute, or worse, a social disaster. One mainstream fact: the Victorians produced more specialized spoons than any previous generation. There were egg spoons, mustard spoons, jelly spoons, even marrow spoons for digging into roasted bones. Historians still argue whether these elaborate distinctions truly improved the eating experience or simply gave bored dinner guests something to gossip about. You study the polished sideboard lined with these utensils like a miniature army of etiquette enforcers. Each one was a signal. A person's spoon choices revealed their upbringing, their education, their sense of refinement. A wealthy host might practically test their guests with so many spoons, they'd need a cheat sheet just to keep from blundering. A fringe tidbit whispers through your mind. Some etiquette guides advised stirring tea in absolute silence, warning that clinking your spoon on the cup could scandalize the entire room. Imagine being terrified of the tiniest musical chime while everyone watches you with pursed lips and narrowed eyes. Across the table, a young man fumbles with a grape spoon, its bowl notched to drain away syrup, while preserving the perfect shape of the fruit. You stifle a sleepy grin as you watch him, nearly drop a slippery grape onto his starched white shirt. In the Victorian world, even fruit came with rules. You lean back in your seat, soaking in the muted chatter, the rustle of silk, the faint jingle of carriage bells outside the window. One matron lifts her marrow spoon with such practiced precision, you might think she'd trained for a medal in spoon handling. And in a sense, she had social grace, was a sport in this age, with spoons as its trophies. Historians still debate whether all these etiquette spoons actually shaped behavior, or whether they simply reflected a culture already obsessed with hierarchy and appearances. But to you, half lulled by the soft glow of candlelight, it hardly matters. You see how the humble spoon became a badge of membership, a passcode, into a club where the rules were everything. Further down the table, a small child grips a sugar spoon, too big for his hand, struggling to measure a single lump without spilling. His governess frowns, correcting him with a crisp "no, dear," before gently guiding the spoon back to its proper angle. You feel a twinge of sympathy. Even little ones were drafted into this army of manners. A delicate breeze moves through the dining room, carrying a faint note of roasted lamb and mint, and you breathe it in, letting it mix with the metallic scent of polished silver. So many spoons, so many rules, you think, and yet under it all the same simple wish to feed, to taste, to share. You catch sight of a lady discreetly slipping a monogrammed mustard spoon into her reticule, a tiny crime, perhaps, but one born from admiration rather than greed. A beautifully made spoon was a thing to covet, a token of wealth and refinement. Let your eyelids flutter at the soft hush around you, the endless march of spoons from dish to dish, the gentle clatter of handles against fine china. Even here, in a world where you might get judged for a single misplaced swirl, there is a kind of comfort in knowing the spoon still holds its same old promise. Nourishment ritual, a small piece of security. You drift further into a drowsy warmth, letting your mind wander through the long table of curving silver shapes, each one carrying its own story. The jelly spoon, the sugar spoon, the marrow spoon, they almost sing in their own quiet chorus, a lullaby of rules that somehow feels safe. So rest a while in this candlelit room, letting the stiffness of Victorian etiquette fade into a gentler sense of order. Feel the weight of the spoon in your hand, steady and familiar, reminding you that even in a world of rules and judgment, there is still sweetness, still warmth, still a simple kindness, hiding at the bottom of the bowl. You slip out of the rigid formality of the Victorian dining hall, letting the clink of marrow spoons and jelly spoons dissolve into a softer hum. Ahead, the world is changing steam and smoke, billowing through the dawn. You step into the clatter and roar of the Industrial Revolution, where spoons, like everything else, go from precious heirlooms to mass-produced miracles, flooding every kitchen drawer. Here you wander through a factory floor, the scent of oil and hot metal in the air, where rows of workers feed gleaming sheets of nickel-silver through giant stamping machines. Sparks fly as spoons pour out by the thousands, uniform identical, ready to cross oceans and fill the homes of rich and poor alike. One mainstream fact during the 19th century, the mechanization of spoon production brought them within reach of nearly everyone, breaking down centuries of class-based tableware. A spoon was no longer a badge of aristocracy. Alone, it became a democratic birthright. You watch a young girl in a cramped apartment clutching a shiny new factory-made spoon as if it were a jewel. Its bowl is perfectly shaped, its handle smooth, its price cheap enough that her family could finally have one for each member, no more sharing. A revolution of dignity hidden in a simple utensil. Historians still argue whether mass-produced spoons robbed them of their artistry or gave more people the comfort and pride they deserved. Maybe both, you think, as you watch a blacksmith hang up his old engraving tools in defeat, replaced by a roaring stamping press. Further down the line, a salesman proudly packs crates of identical spoons destined for colonial outposts and frontier towns. Even the far corners of empire could now share in this small, shining symbol of civilization, one spoon at a time. In a boarding house kitchen, you see a cook stirring cabbage soup with a battered factory press spoon, its handle stamped with a simple floral design. It may not be as delicate as a Renaissance heirloom, but it still stirs up the same human warmth. A fringed tidbit from an old trade magazine suggests some factories sold wedding packs of spoons with matching patterns, promising young couples a respectable start to married life, no shameful shortage of utensils at the table. You slip through a noisy street, past shops displaying rows of nickel-plated spoons gleaming in the window. Housewives pause to point, dreaming of a matched set to replace their mismatched wooden spoons. You sense their longing not just for a tool, but for the respect it signaled. The air tastes of coal smoke and new dreams. A child shows off a spoon decorated with a stamped bird, smiling proudly at his first very own eating tool. You can practically hear his heartbeat, fast and thrilled, as if he'd been handed a scepter. Historians still debate whether factory spoons truly eliminated hunger, but no one doubts they helped countless families share their food with dignity. A spoon for each person meant you didn't have to wait, you didn't have to beg, you didn't have to fear. You rest against a brick wall, feeling the vibrations of machinery rumbling through your bones, and watch men and women leaving the factory gates, their pockets carrying a spoon or two as a sort of accidental bonus. A tiny rebellion, maybe, but also a sign of how spoons had become so common that no one feared losing one anymore. There is something oddly comforting in this abundance. You let yourself breathe it in the sense that the spoon was no longer the guarded treasure of kings, but a humble, faithful companion of every cook and every hungry child. The world outside the factory is hard crowded, uncertain, but the spoon in a worker's lunch pail is steady, familiar, a quiet promise that the next mouthful of soup will be theirs alone. Let that thought soothe you as the hiss of steam fades and the night grows gentle again. You see the same silhouette of a spoon repeated across 1,000 dinner tables, 1,000 tiny mirrors reflecting the same hope. And as your eyelids grow heavy, you might even whisper thanks to those roaring presses and battered molds for spreading comfort far beyond noble halls. From clay scoops to silver trophies to these stamped nickel spoons, the journey has been long, but the mission remains the same: to lift something warm to the lips and to remind every soul they are worthy of a good meal. Rest in that thought for a moment, breathing slow and deep as you hear the night winds stirring outside the factory walls. Let the steady echo of mass-produced spoons clinking in simple kitchens rock you gently, a lullaby of progress, humble and hopeful, carrying you ever onward. You slip out of the smoke-choked factories, leaving behind the clatter of nickel-plated spoons rolling off conveyor belts, and drift gently forward into the modern era, a place of plastics, polymers, and even rockets. Here the humble spoon has changed once more, shifting from a symbol of polite manners to a tool of convenient speed, and sometimes sheer adventure. Imagine yourself in a bright mid-century diner, chrome stools and checkered floors, where a teenager twirls a plastic spoon in a milkshake, so thick it nearly snaps the handle. The plastic feels cheap, light, disposable, and yet it holds that same dependable curve. One mainstream fact by the 1950s injection, molded plastic spoons, became an everyday staple around the world, providing low-cost, hygienic, single-use comfort to millions. Historians still argue whether plastic spoons liberated the working classes from washing up or whether they heralded an age of waste and careless consumption. Both ideas swirl in your mind as you watch a waitress toss a whole bin of plastic spoons after a busy breakfast rush. It feels wasteful, but also efficient, a quiet contradiction. Beyond the diner, you watch a little boy use a bright red plastic spoon to eat a drippy ice cream cone, his grin wide cheeks sticky with sugar. A fringe tidbit catches your sleepy brain. Some fast food chains once offered collectible plastic spoons stamped with cartoon mascots, a marketing trick that turned an everyday scoop into a treasured prize. You wander further, finding a picnic, spread under the wide blue sky where families pull spoons from their disposable cutlery packs. The breeze lifts a napkin. The laughter of children rings through the air, and the spoons catch the sunlight, just so reminding you of the silver heirlooms they replaced, only lighter, cheaper, faster. Then, just as you settle into this plastic-soaked century, you catch a glimpse of something truly extraordinary, a spoon on a spaceship. Titanium featherlight, yet strong enough to endure launch forces, carried by astronauts to orbit. You follow a crew member floating in zero gravity, guiding a glob of rehydrated stew with a spoon designed for life beyond Earth. It feels almost sacred, that simple curve still doing its age-old work even among the stars. One astronaut smiles, demonstrating how a spoon helps scoop floating water droplets, a tiny ballet of surface tension and courage. Historians still puzzle whether future spoons might be replaced by squeeze tubes alone, but for now the spoon clings on, refusing to be erased even in space. The shift from factory spoons to space spoons feels so fast it might leave your head spinning. Yet the same principle applies: a curved scoop, an extension of the human wish to gather food, to feed, to nurture. Back on Earth, You notice the world stirring to new concerns. People question disposable spoons, fear mountains of plastic choking the seas, and begin to reach for metal or bamboo again. The spoon, in a sense, comes full circle, adapting to each era's dreams and regrets. A breeze blows through a food truck festival where vendors hand out biodegradable cornstarch spoons proud of their green promise. You taste the faint graininess of the material, oddly comforting, as if nature herself had lent you her tools for a moment. You pause to watch a small girl stirring bubble tea with a thick, reusable metal spoon engraved with a pattern of waves. Her mother reminds her not to throw it away, it is meant to last. It feels hopeful, this moment, as if humans are remembering that a spoon can be precious again. Historians still debate if these eco-friendly spoons will truly shift culture or become another passing trend. But you see in that child's careful hands a quiet future, where the spoon might hold not just food, but values, respect, care, and a sense of balance. You rest for a moment in the breeze, hearing distant traffic, watching a tiny compostable spoon tumble across a patch of grass before someone rescues it, refusing to waste even a scrap of kindness. Let that thought rock you gently, the idea that the spoon, whether carved from bone, molded from plastic, or forged from space-age alloys, is still trying to fulfill the same promise: to serve, to share, to bring something warm and good to a waiting heart. Breathe deeply, let the modern world blur around you, and feel a tiny measure of peace. The spoon has survived so many centuries of change, and so have you. So rest your head for a while, cradled by the simple shape of a spoon, as night falls on a world still learning, still hoping, still reaching for a better tomorrow, one gentle scoop at a time. You wander onward, leaving behind bubble tea booths and compostable spoons fluttering on a festival lawn, and find yourself drawn into a quieter, more curious place, a world where the spoon is no longer just a tool, but a work of art. The 20th century's design revolution has arrived, and it refuses to leave even humble spoons untouched. You step through the doors of a modern gallery, where a display case holds spoons so wild and beautiful they hardly seem meant for mouths. One is a swirl of polished steel, twisted like a dancer in motion. Another is carved from translucent resin, glimmering with flecks of gold leaf. You catch your breath because they are spoons, but also sculptures, tiny masterpieces, the marriage of function and imagination. One mainstream fact by the mid-1900s designers across Europe and America began experimenting with everyday objects, elevating spoons to a new level of aesthetic. They tested strange shapes, new angles, surprising materials, all in pursuit of reimagining how you could hold, scoop, and savor. You watch an artist at their workbench tapping a silver rod into a long, graceful handle, adding a swirl to the tip that feels almost whimsical. Historians still argue whether these modern spoons were practical for eating or merely decorative, but their impact on design is undeniable. A testament that even something so simple could become a canvas. A fringe tidbit peeks into your thoughts. Some designers created spoons you could barely use at all, with flat bowls or impossible handles, meant to challenge the diner's expectations and spark conversation. Food, one designer declared, should not be mindless, and so the spoon became a question mark. You slip through the gallery, noticing visitors tilting their heads at a spoon shaped like a tiny ship sails billowing from its handle. Another resembles a long, thin feather so delicate you fear it might snap from a breath. Each one makes you smile, a silent dare to look again at something you thought you already knew. In a quiet corner, a family shares a picnic on the gallery lawn, their utensils borrowed from a rental box, clean, sturdy, unremarkable. Yet even here, a child raises their spoon high, pretending it's a sword, a magic wand, a treasure of pirates. You see how the simplest shape can still spark wonder, no matter how many polished art pieces you've seen. Historians still puzzle over why spoons held such a strong place in modern design compared to, say, forks or knives. Perhaps it is their direct nurturing curve, so human, so universal, so ready to cradle and serve. Beyond the museum walls, you hear the faint rumble of a city alive with restaurants, kitchens, food trucks, and cafes, each one relying on spoons in their drawers, whether minimalist stainless or playful patterned plastic. The spoon, no matter how avant-garde the design world tried to twist, it remained faithful to its first duty, bringing nourishment to the lips. You let yourself rest on a gallery bench, letting the soft hum of conversations drift around you. A curator discusses a spoon made from recycled skateboards, praising its storytelling handle, while a sleepy visitor rests their head against a display case, soothed by the repetitive, reassuring shape of spoon after spoon. That is the spoon's gift. You realize even in the hands of artists it stays familiar. It allows humans to play, to challenge, to dream, but it never abandons its promise. A breeze flutters through the gallery's open doors, carrying the scent of coffee from a nearby cafe. You stand to wander outside, passing one last piece on a pedestal, a spoon made from local clay, fired until it shines, returning to the earth, where the first spoons were pinched together by trembling hands. It feels like the world has turned in a perfect sleepy circle. So you walk into the city's fading afternoon light, letting your eyelids grow heavy as you remember spoons shaped by both need and beauty, always willing to bend to the dreams of their makers. Rest in that knowledge for a moment that even the simplest object can hold an entire human story written in metal, wood, clay, or glass, ready to cradle one more sip of warmth, one more taste of hope. Let the quiet of the gallery lull you, soft and peaceful, as the gentle curve of a designer spoon rocks you toward dreams. You leave behind the gallery's polished floors, the shimmering swirl of designer spoons, and walk onward into a place that feels half real, half dream, a kitchen of the near future. Here you find the spoon has evolved once more, blending human tradition with modern technology in ways that would have seemed like magic only a century ago. Imagine stepping up to a sleek white countertop where a spoon rests that seems ordinary until you notice the glowing sensor along its handle blinking softly with data. You watch someone lift it to taste a simmering stew, and the spoon instantly sends nutritional information to their smart watch. Calories, salt, sugar, even the temperature reported in a calm, robotic voice. One mainstream fact in the 2020s, tech innovators began experimenting with smart spoons, merging sensors, connectivity, and apps to monitor people's diets. Some spoons vibrate gently if you eat too quickly, others warn of dangerous allergens. Historians still argue whether these innovations truly help or just feed a culture obsessed with data and performance. You lean closer, curious, and see a child trying a spoon with an augmented reality screen built into the handle, turning each bite into a colorful mini-game. You almost laugh at the very idea of a medieval cook or a Victorian hostess. Seeing such a thing would have knocked them faint. A fringe tidbit floats through your thoughts. Researchers in Japan even created spoons that enhance salty flavor through tiny electrical currents, allowing patients on low-sodium diets to experience more taste without harming their health. It's as if spoons themselves have learned to trick the tongue, a tiny miracle, or a gentle mischief, depending on your mood. You drift through this futuristic kitchen, noting how food is carefully portioned into color-coded smart bowls with the spoon reporting every scoop. In another corner, a young athlete uses a titanium spoon with a carbon fiber grip, specially designed to weigh almost nothing and resist all corrosion, the same type astronauts might carry on a Mars mission someday. Historians still puzzle over whether this will be the final chapter for spoons or simply another pivot in their long journey. Surely humans will keep dreaming up new ways to scoop and share, to stir and serve. The spoon, after all, has always been a flexible friend. Past the glowing smart kitchen, you see a quiet moment unfold. An old woman holding a battered silver spoon from her grandmother stirring soup in a simple pot on a gas stove. The sensors and flashing lights fade from your mind as you watch her close her eyes and taste trusting memories more than machines. That moment feels warm, soft, real, a reminder that no matter how advanced spoons become, they will still serve the same timeless hope. You rest a while by her stove, feeling the gentle heat, the rich scent of broth, the click of the spoon against the pot's rim. It is exactly the same lullaby people have known since those first mud scoops, a reassurance that you will eat tonight, that you will live to see the sun rise again. One quiet question lingers in your mind: will future generations still gather around a table, still share a single pot, still feel the comfort of a humble spoon passed hand to hand? Historians debate it. Futurists theorize about it, but you sense the answer in your heart. Yes, yes they will. Because even if spoons count calories, light up with emojis, or beep out safety alerts, they still hold the same gentle curve that has carried survival through centuries. You take a last look around the glowing kitchen, then slip through a doorway that feels almost like stepping back into your own home. A plain metal spoon waits by a bowl of warm rice. No sensors, no screens, just a promise in its familiar curve. You sit, you taste, you breathe, and it is enough. Let that simplicity rock you gently, reminding you that no matter how fast the world changes, a spoon is still a spoon. Still a humble bridge between hunger and hope, still ready to cradle one last bite of comfort. Close your eyes if you like and rest in the quiet faith that technology will never fully replace the human heart or the steady ancient shape of a spoon. You step softly from the glowing kitchen of tomorrow, letting the beeping smart spoons fade away, and wander into a gentler, quieter place. Here in this hush of the present moment, the spoon returns to what it has always been at its core: a simple scoop, a humble cradle of comfort, a soft ritual of trust. Imagine sitting at a kitchen table, nothing fancy, nothing showy, just a plain white bowl, steam rising from warm soup, and in your hand, a familiar spoon, the same one you've used for years, maybe passed down from your parents or found in a thrift shop. Its handle is smoothed by time, its bowl a bit scuffed, but you trust it completely. It fits your hand like a handshake, a reassurance that dinner will be okay. One mainstream fact surveys show that even in a world of modern gadgets, most people still prefer a simple, traditional spoon for everyday meals. It is a shape we recognize on instinct, a silent promise that food will reach our lips without fuss or failure. You swirl the spoon in the bowl, tracing gentle circles, breathing in the scent of vegetables and herbs. Historians still argue whether the spoon's magic is its practicality or its poetry, whether it is cherished simply because it works or because it feels like a tiny act of love. Maybe it's both. You decide as you sip from its shallow curve. In a faraway refugee camp, you can almost see a mother sharing her single spoon with her children, moving from bowl to bowl, carrying warmth to each hungry mouth. That battered spoon is a survivor, a hero, a lifeline. Its curve is as noble as any king's golden treasure. A fringe tidbit drifts into your mind, In some cultures, spoons are buried with their owners as a final sign that they will never go hungry again, even in the afterlife. The spoon is more than a tool, it is hope, carved into a shape you can hold as you rest here. You remember all the spoons you've seen on this journey, mud scoops by firelight, golden Egyptian lotus, spoons, Roman snail scoops, pewter medieval relics, silver Renaissance trophies, sugar spoons locked away like diamonds, nickel factory spoons, plastic picnic spoons, titanium space spoons, smart spoons, blinking with algorithms. Each one, in its own time, carried the same unspoken vow to feed, to comfort, to connect. You glance down now at your own spoon, familiar, solid, simple. You dip it once more, feeling how perfectly it fits between your lips, how naturally it delivers a bit of warmth. No technology can replace that small, silent miracle. Historians still debate where the spoon's journey might go next. Maybe spoons will become fully edible or woven from 3D printed seaweed or equipped with sensors we cannot even imagine. But the heart of the spoon will stay the same, a curved promise in your hand. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the steam wash your face, hearing a clock tick somewhere beyond the kitchen window. Your breathing slows calm and peaceful as you rest in the ancient knowledge that even on your most fragile days, a spoon is waiting to help you heal one gentle mouthful at a time. Let that image settle a lullaby for your thoughts, wrapping you up in the tender truth that the spoon's story is also yours, an echo of survival, kindness and quiet courage that runs through every century, every home, every beating heart. So lean back now if you wish, and let the weight of the day slip away. Feel the spoon in your hand, perfectly balanced, perfectly humble, perfectly you. And now, dear dreamer, let your mind drift even further, slowing with each gentle breath. You have followed the spoon's story from mud to gold, from polished silver to space-age titanium, from humble whittled sticks to dazzling modern sculptures. Across every culture and every era, the spoon has stayed loyal to its promise to lift comfort to your lips, to cradle warmth, to remind you of the calm simplicity of sharing. As the night deepens around you, imagine that first ancient fireside, where trembling hands shaped clay into a bowl, hoping to taste one more dawn. Feel how that simple curve traveled on through time, passing through empires and palaces, through wars and feasts, through quiet kitchens and noisy dining halls, always carrying the same gentle mission. Picture a soft glow of lamplight on your own table. Now the hush of your room, the faintest breeze stirring the air. Let the familiar shape of a spoon settle in your mind, a steady reminder that you are cared for, that nourishment is near, that you will never face the night alone. Breathe in slowly, letting your shoulders drop, your heartbeat ease. Your thoughts grow quiet. Let the spoon rock you like a lullaby, a symbol older than any language telling you again and again that you are safe, you are warm, you will be fed, and you will wake with strength for tomorrow. Close your eyes if you haven't already and drift into sleep with the calm knowledge that even the smallest kindness a single spoonful can carry centuries of love.